Our scripture for today is from Psalm 146, 5 through 10. Happy are those whose help is in the God of Jacob, whose hope is in the Lord their God, who made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that is in them, who keeps faith forever, who executes justice for the oppressed, who gives food to the hungry. The Lord sets the prisoners free. The Lord opens the eyes of the blind. The Lord lifts up those who are bowed down. The Lord loves the righteous. The Lord watches over the strangers. He upholds the orphan and the widow. But the way of the wicked he brings to ruin. The Lord will reign forever. Your God, O Zion, for all generations. Praise the Lord. Thanks be to God.
So in 2008, September of 2008, Hurricane Ike formed off the coast of the Atlantic Ocean. And it made its way into the Gulf of Mexico as a Category 4 storm. As it came in, of course, there's the cone of probability. If any of you have ever lived in hurricane area, there's what they call the cone of probability. And it kept narrowing down and narrowing down on us. And at some point, we realized we had to evacuate. We lived in a house at that time that had a sunken living room and was half a mile from Clear Creek. Now, if you've ever watched the news and seen flooding in Houston, I guarantee you they mentioned Clear Creek. Because it's notorious. You spit in it and it overflows its banks. And so we knew that our house had had water in it before, and we were concerned, very concerned. So we began to prep for a hurricane. We began to get everything ready. And if you've never had to do that, it's a lot. It really is. Because, first of all, you've got to pack for however long you're going to be gone. And you don't know how long that is. Sometimes it might be overnight. Sometimes they may say you can't come back, and it's going to be a couple of weeks. And we had 2 little kids at the time. Of course, they want to pack every toy they've never played with. You know, because they're all precious. And of course, you go in there and realize they haven't packed underwear and they haven't packed socks, so you've got to do that, plus your own packing. We also had cats and dogs and rabbits, probably a guinea pig. Oops, I went out. It's dead. That's all right. Watch this one die too. We've got 3. We had cats, dogs, guinea pigs, rabbits. I'm sorry to say we didn't take the chickens. But we had to find kennels for all of them, food for all of them, get all of that together. Then we also had to make sure that if we came home and there was no electricity, that we also had food and water and a can opener left behind. Then we also had to prepare the house just in case it flooded. So everything that mattered to us, we had to pick it up and put it somewhere. And then we had to find all the important papers and the photos and all that and make sure that they got put into, in our case we had a minivan, put them in the minivan to make sure that we took that with us. But we also at that time had 7 horses. Could you turn it down just a little bit? We had 7 horses. Well, they were ponies, but they were big ponies. And I only had a 2-horse trailer. For ponies, it could be stretched into a 3-pony trailer. But that was a stretch. Plus, I'm still going back and forth to work. So we're trying to clean up branches, we're trying to board up windows, I'm going back and forth to work, and I've somehow got to figure out where am I going to take these 7 ponies and how am I going to get them out of here with a 2-pony trailer. Then, to add to all of this, the state, well, I don't know if it's the state, the county, whatever, they came on and said, all livestock has to be moved by 8 a.m. tomorrow morning. And I'm sitting there thinking, what am I going to do? The place I was thinking about taking the ponies was all the way north of Abilene, which was an 8-hour trip. There was no way I could make it there and back. So I called another friend of mine and I said, is there any chance I can bring my ponies to you? I'm going to have to make 3 trips at least, but that's the only chance I've got. She was 3.5 hours away. It's the only chance I've got of getting all these ponies out of here. And between the flooding, the wind debris, I was very concerned about the ponies. And then on top of it, our entire fence line was covered in trees. And I knew that even if they didn't get flooded or hit by debris, that the trees would come down on the fence line and I'd have loose ponies. Well, when I called her, she said, I can do you one better. She said, if you will wait until my boyfriend gets off work, I will bring his truck and livestock trailer down and we can load up all 7 ponies and evacuate you all at once. And I said, man, that sounds fantastic. And on top of it, she said we could stay at her place. She had a barn with one of those apartments on top. She didn't have anyone living in it at the time. And I said, okay, we have cats, dogs, rabbits, guinea pigs, snakes, whatever. And she said, that's fine. But some of them have to stay downstairs in the stalls. So she showed up at 2 a.m. in the morning because her boyfriend worked a late shift and she had to drive 3.5, they had to drive 3.5 hours down. So at 2 a.m. in the morning, exhausted and tired from spending all of our time trying to prepare, we then loaded up 7 ponies and started our trip to Waco at 3 a.m. in the morning. Now, he stayed behind. John David decided to stay behind to finish up all of the prep. It did eventually evacuate, just so you know, but he needed to stay behind at that point, and so I left in the minivan with the cats, the dogs, the rabbits, the guinea pigs, etc. And she and her boyfriend drove the trailer with a stock trailer and the horses in it. I was so tired, so exhausted. I thought, I don't know that I can do this. It's 3 o'clock in the morning. I've gotten hardly any sleep for the last few days, and we've been just exhausted putting up plywood and all this stuff. I'm so tired. I thought, I can't do this. And so I turned to Danny, who was 10 years old at the time. Brienne, by the way, was 6, but she was already out. I mean, for a 6-year-old, that was like so much excitement, and she was just overwhelmed, and she had her bag of toys, and she just crashed. But Danny, I turned to Danny, and I said, Danny, I'm really scared. I cannot stay awake. Can you talk to me? And bless Danny's heart, for 3.5 hours, he ran nonstop. While he made friendship bracelets with rubber bands, hundreds of them. And by the time that we drove into her farm in Waco, where we watched the sun come up, I realized that I was like minutes away from not being able to drive anymore. Just not being able to drive. But I can't imagine having to do that journey by myself. Imagine if I'd had to do that by myself with no one to talk to. If they just both fallen asleep and left me on my own, I probably would have had to stop somewhere, or worse yet, gotten into an accident. So I'm so glad I did not have to do that journey by myself. You know, the journey of life can be so tiring at times. It can be tough. Sometimes we're just overwhelmed with so much stuff at one time. But the thing is, we never have to do it alone. You know, I found myself saying, are we there yet? Are we there yet? Or I would have if I hadn't had someone to talk to me, someone to be with me. And to this day, I can't tell you how many dogs and cats, I can't tell you what route I took, but I still remember a lot of the conversation between Danny and I. Because that brought me joy. in our journey of life that can be so tiring and so hard at times, we can have joy because we know we don't do it alone. God is with us. Now this psalm has some great stuff. By the way, I do have a little map, I don't know if you showed it, of where the storm actually hit. Can you go back one? That X, the red X, that's our house. Just so you know, we only got water in the living room. We did lose all the trees. I think there was 2 or 3 left standing, and it did take out the fences. But other than that, we were in pretty good shape. And just a little shout out to the Methodist Church. We were overwhelmed with the amount of work we had to do. We didn't have power for a couple of weeks. But I had to go back to work. And one day, that was the only place, by the way, we could charge phones, was at work, because we didn't have power at home. And I'm at work, and he calls me, and he says, well, I'm done. And I said, what? And he goes, I'm done with the yard. I got all the trees picked up, everything cut up and stacked along the front. I was like, yeah, that's so funny. And he said, no, I'm done. Seriously, I'm done. It's all stacked and cut up. And the Methodist Church had come through. They were looking for the worst houses to fix, and ours looked the worst because we had thousands of trees down. And so they had come in with big equipment and chopped it all up and stacked it. And I mean, to this day, I don't even know what Methodist church it was, but I know it was a Methodist church. So little shout out to them. But anyway, that's where the storm hit. But this psalm that Grace just read for us talks about joy. And if we dig into it, we can see that it gives some reasons for joy. And it starts out talking about how God is the creator. And we think about God as the creator, and we say that. It's so easy to say, yeah, God created the universe. I mean, we know that intellectually. But really think about what it means that God created the universe. God created the earth. He created us. I don't know if any of you have ever taken biochemistry. I did. And I'm telling you, the things that our body does is amazing. The intricacies of even the cell. Just the fact that like potassium moves in and salt moves out and all this stuff that goes on in our bodies. What an amazing engineer to design the human body. And yes, sometimes the human body breaks, but you know, honestly, it takes a lot to break down the human body. We abuse our bodies quite a bit before they totally break down. But if you really think about that, think about a seed. A little bitty seed grows into a giant tree. And God engineered all of that stuff and packed it into a little seed and said, this is going to grow into a redwood. That's amazing. That's an incredible amount of power. And then God says, I am the one that can create a universe, create the tiny cells in your body, and I want to be with you. God with us, Emmanuel. And then he says too, and I'm going to send my spirit to be with you and empower you. The creator of the universe is willing to lend us power to do his work. Isn't that incredible to think about? The question is, do we really plug into that? Do we really tap into that? Great story. There's a farmer wanted to cut some trees down on his place. And he goes into Lowe's and he goes up and he says, I need the best chainsaw you've got. And the merchant comes down and says, okay, well, I got this one. It's guaranteed to be able to cut down 50 trees a day. So that's what I need. He takes it home and he starts using it. He can't even do 3 trees with it. So he's frustrated and he's angry and he goes back to the Lowe's or Home Depot, whatever I said it was, and he takes it and he sets it on the counter and he said, man, this thing's junk and I want my money back. And the guy on the counter said, what do you mean it's junk? He said, well, I could only do 3 trees with it. He said, well, let me take a look at it. He pulls it and he pulls the cord and he goes, Whoosh! And he goes, oh, what's that noise? Do we always pull the cord? Do we tap in? You know, are we trying to go through life alone? Not accessing the one that says, I can get you through. And if we think about that, it can bring us so much joy to say, oh wow, the Creator is willing to walk with me and give me access to all that He has. That's an incredible thing, and it can bring us a tremendous amount of joy. The second thing this psalm tells us is that God absolutely hates injustice. He can't stand it. It's just one of those things that really, really bothers Him. And what in this world takes away our joy usually? Injustice, oppression. And God says He can't stand it. Listen to this verse here from Amos that He's going to put up there on the screen for you. It says, I despise your religious festivals. Your assemblies are a stench to me. Even though you bring me burnt offerings and grain offerings, I will not accept them. Though you bring choice fellowship offerings, I will have no regard for them. Away with the noise of your songs. I will not listen to the music of your harps. But let justice roll on like a river, righteousness like a never-failing stream. He considers our fight against injustice more important than showing up for church. That's how much He hates injustice. And He tells us, I'd rather you go out and fight for justice than show up and get everything right. The music, the lights, the sermon. Thank goodness, right? Because we all get C's there sometimes. Musicians get A's minus the trumpet, right? But God says that He cannot stand injustice. And He wants us to go out and fight injustice. That's the most important way we can worship Him. All right, so if God is the Creator of all that we know and has all this power, and He hates injustice, do you think He'll be with us when we go out and deal with injustice? He will fight with us. He will be with us. He hates the injustice we're suffering as well. So we can have so much joy knowing that God is with us as He looks at the world and says, yeah, that's wrong, and that's not right, and that's oppressive. We don't have to think that God has a blind eye to all that stuff. God is very aware. And God is willing to be with us as well to fight it and to just get through, to be on the journey with us, on this journey. When I think about the church too, I know that sometimes when we look at the journey, we think about it, we think, man, this is overwhelming. And we talked about that last week. It can be overwhelming. And sometimes we think, well, there's just no way we can fight all that stuff. But I want y'all to know that the church has done an incredible amount of work fighting injustice. A lot of the human rights that we have now are because of the church. It was the church that led the fight against slavery. It was the church that led the right for women to be able to vote and have equal rights as men. It's the church now, by the way, that is fighting human trafficking. Two of the leading organizations fighting human trafficking right now are religious. They're Christian organizations. The church is the one that started education programs for the common people. For the longest time, the only way you could get any kind of education was to have money and wealth. And the church said, let's start Sunday schools. By the way, Sunday schools were originally started to teach kids to read and write. They weren't about teaching Bible stories. They were to teach kids to read and write. We have a great example of that right over here, McGurty. There was no public school there. And the church, the Methodist Church, came in and said, these kids need an education and an opportunity. And they built a school in there and ran it for a long time until public school system came in and said, well, we'll take over the school. We'll be responsible for the kids. But the church has done tremendous things. A lot of the laws that we have in this country come out of Christian ideals. So the church has done incredible work. And we can have a lot of joy knowing that God will be with the church if we will concentrate on what He wants us to do and go on this journey in helping fight injustice. God will be with us. So we can have joy in that. And then finally, we get to this last part where he says in this psalm, he says, I have one more example real quick of Jesus fighting injustice here. It says, Jesus left that place and entered the synagogue. A man was there with a withered hand, and they asked him, is it lawful to cure on the Sabbath? So that they might accuse him. He said to them, suppose one of you has only one sheep and it falls into a pit on the Sabbath. Will you not lay hold of it and lift it out? How much more valuable is a human being than a sheep? So it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath. Then he said to the man, stretch out your hand. He stretched it out, and it was restored, as sound as the other. But the Pharisees went out and conspired against him, how to destroy him. So here we have this great example of Jesus also saying, you know what's more important? Justice. Justice. So we can trust that God is with us as we fight injustice. And then finally, we get to the end of the psalm. It tells us that we can have joy because God will reign forever. You know, when Christ came the first time, He changed the world. He turned the world upside down. He really made a radical difference. And everywhere that Christianity has gone, it should and does often make a difference. And then He says, I'm leaving behind the Spirit so that you can continue with the work I've started. So we know that God will continue to help us make a difference. That God will continue. And if He's done all of that the first time, how much more will He do when He comes back the second time? And Rick's giving me a look like I forgot a slide. Did I?
I don't think so.
Okay.
This one's the next one.
Okay. Yeah, he had that look like, man, Tinker's lost.
Maybe he's lost. I'm looking in a mirror.
No, it's okay. So you know, this journey can cause us to ask ourselves, man, are we there yet? I'm tired. This is tough. I don't know if I can do all this. But what joy we can have knowing that the Creator of the universe says, man, I'm aware of all those things. I hate them too. And I'm going to be with you. And I'm going to walk with you and stay with you through all of that. And be with us to the very end. And that can bring us joy. Amen.